We're doing a series where my hope, as we kind of go through the Old Testament a little bit, we get to know God a bit better. And I want to begin by probably acknowledging not just myself but many others, because last Monday was kind of a heartbreaker for football fans, at least if you're a Buckeye fan. Those pesky Crimson Tide seemed to pull a number on those Buckeyes, did they not? But there are those who love professional football, and they know that right now it's a big time for them. I mentioned in the first service that, of course, those who follow the Bears, because my grandsons were sitting there, they have nothing to root for, in which my youngest grandson shouted out, "Yeah, what about the Colts?" And I thought, little boy. Anyway, he was right. So I don't have a lot to brag about myself, but I did think it might be a good idea if we would bring some football terminology that's found its way into the church. So consider this, if you will. For instance, there's the draw play. And in the church, the draw play is what many people do with the bulletins during the service. There's backfield in motion. That's when we make a trip to the bathroom during the service. For the 2-minute warning, which is the point at which you realize the sermon is almost over and you begin to pack up your belongings. Or instant replay, when the preacher loses his notes and falls back on last week's sermon illustrations. And one more sudden death, and that's what happens to the attention span of the congregation if the preacher goes into overtime. Today I want to talk about God's omnipresence. Actually, there are 3 attributes of God that should always be kept together in your mind, and they all begin with that 4-letter prefix omni. For instance, there's omniscience, or there's omnipotence. The one that we're going to talk about this morning is omnipresence. And if you wanted to kind of get a little clarification about what those 3 things are, we could say that God is all-knowing, He is all-powerful, and He is everywhere present at the same time. One of my favorite preachers that I like to listen to is a guy by the name of Tony Evans. He writes that these 3 attributes always work in tandem. He says, God knows what needs to be done, that's omniscience. He has the power to do it, that's omnipotence. And He's always wherever He needs to be to do whatever needs to be done. That's omnipresence. And God's omnipresence is one of the most difficult doctrines of the entire Bible, because the question is, where is God? And it's a very important question. The seeker wants to know where God is. The skeptic wants to know where God is. And so does the guilty sinner want to know, so that he or she can run in the opposite direction. But most importantly, I think the hurting person wants to know, because they may feel abandoned and ask the question, where is God when I need Him? And the reason this one is so hard is that we have nothing to compare it with. We can only be at one place at one time, but only God can be everywhere at once. We can't even be 2 places at once, a fact that we sometimes forget. So let me give you a simple definition of omnipresence. It's the Lord our God is everywhere at once. He is everywhere present all the time. Paul Little writes, God is not a substance spread out in a thin layer all over the earth. All of it is in Chicago, in Calcutta, in Cairo, and in Caracas at once and at the same time. Someone else has said that God's presence is like the air we breathe. The air is odorless, it's tasteless, it's invisible. Although there are times when the wind might blow from Imes or Mars and it kind of smells sort of terrible, except for the dogs. They kind of linger outside just sniffing the air, thinking that for that moment they're in heaven. But most of the time we don't even think about the air we breathe, yet we depend on it for our very existence. Likewise, God's presence is all around us, and if it were withdrawn, none of us could survive even one moment. A great place to talk about the omniscience of God is in Psalm 139. It's also definitively establishes God's omniscience and omnipresence. But for our purposes this morning, I'm going to park in Psalms 139, verses 7 through 12. And I have them in the wall, and I invite you to follow along with me. The writer says, David writes, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. So I'm going to take a look at this kind of verse by verse and sort of do a little exposition on the verse. Let's start by looking at verse 7. David here asks two questions. Where can I go from your spirit? And where can I flee from your presence? And these rhetorical questions are an emphatic way of declaring that God's presence is everywhere. And while David may have wanted to run from God at different points in his life, he understands that there is nowhere he could go to get away from God. And since God is spirit, he can pierce and penetrate us. It is just impossible to get away from him. In verse 8, he contemplates what would happen if we tried to go up into the heavens. Heavens is a vast place, and yet there's no way of escaping God. The phrase in the depths refers to Sheol, which in the Bible is the realm of the dead. And throughout the Bible, these two places are contrasted. Heaven is a place of light and life, while Sheol is a place of darkness and death. God is present in the upper regions of the world, and he is in the depths of the earth. And that word you is very emphatic, and it's impressive in the original. You kind of have to shout it out to get the meaning. You, oh God, you are there. And after checking out the heights and the depths, David now decides to travel from east to west. In verse 9, he met the dawn and he traveled with the sun to the far side of the sea. And that would be the Mediterranean Sea, which was west of the Holy Land. The Jewish people, for the most part, were not mariners. They did not like the sea, but God was there. And that phrase, wings of the dawn, is an elegant metaphor that refers to the sunbeams that flash out from the sun in the morning. They come out swiftly and then they disappear just as quickly. And David is saying that if he could just pluck these wings of the dawn and travel as far as the swiftest light, even there, God would be with him. And should David flee to the most distant and obscure island, God would already be there. Even if he were able to travel at the speed of light, David could not outrace God. You see, unlike the pagan deities whose authority was limited to a certain geographical area of operation, the Lord's authority and presence extends to the heavens, to the depths, to the east, and to the west. Verse 10 provides David some comfort. Wherever he ends up, God's hand will guide him and protect him. It was impossible to run so far away that he would be out of the reach of God. You know the story of Jonah, the story of him fleeing God. If you read in chapter 1 of his book, you'll find that he was commissioned by God to go and to preach against the great city of Nineveh. Well, he was to tell them how wicked they were, and Jonah didn't want the assignment. Not because he wasn't in favor of telling them how wicked that they were, but he knew that God was going to show them some mercy and grace. These people were the mortal enemies of Israel, and Jonah wanted no part of God's redemptive plan for these barbarians. So what does he do? He tries to flee from God. And Jonah 1:3 says that he was running away from the Lord. In fact, we know that instead of heading to Nineveh, he booked a boat that was to go the exact opposite direction. He went west instead of going east. And scholars tell us that he was headed for the country of what we now know as Spain, trying to get as far away from Nineveh as he could, and as far away from God as he could. Now, he probably breathed a sigh of relief when the ship sailed away from the shore. He thought he was in the clear that he had outwitted God. But what Jonah found out was that God was with him on the ship and would soon be with him in the belly of a whale. My friends, it's foolish to run from God because there's no place to hide. Like David, Jonah investigated the heights and the depths in the east and the west and the land and the sea, and he could not find a place where God was not. And wherever Jonah went, God's hand was there to guide him. His right hand was holding him fast. In Psalm 91:11, we see that David started to wonder if there was a difference in day and night. He said, if I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me, David played around with the idea that if he just did some stuff in the dark, then he would at last be in the reach of God's presence. I remember when my boys were very young and we'd play hide and seek. And they'd stand in front of me and they'd put their hands over their face. And even though they couldn't see me, they figured I couldn't see them. But that didn't work for them as well. It was dark to them, but it was very light to me. That's how it is with God. We think that we're hiding things from Him just because it's dark, or we think we're doing something in secret. My friends, God sees everything because He's everywhere, present at the same time. Verse 12 helps us to understand more about God's pervasive presence. It says, "The darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. And the curtains of the evening will no more cover us than the wings of the morning will allow us to escape His presence." Everything we do, whether we think we can be seen or not, is done in the full presence of our holy, majestic, and ever-present God. Now, there are several important implications of God's omnipresence. Let me just mention a few. Number one, God cannot be contained in a building. Solomon understood this when he said in 1 Kings 8:27, "But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built?" And while I understand what people mean when they say that they're going to God's house when they come to church, it's not entirely accurate. God does not live in a house made by human hands. It can certainly be argued that the temple was a holy place, but today God dwells among His people, and His people wherever they are and when and wherever they go. Second, I think it's important to understand that God cannot be localized in a city or a nation. This truth would keep us from boasting about America's supposed moral integrity. God is no less present in one portion of the universe than He is in any other. He is no more present anywhere than where you are right now. And in other words, anyone, anywhere in the universe might say, "The Lord is in this place." So wherever you are, God is right there, right now. See, our God is a global God. He does not cheer for one team to win the Super Bowl, unless it's the Colts. He has no one to root for this year. Number three, God is always present whether we believe it or not. In the early days of space travel, one of the Russian cosmonauts returned from orbiting the Earth. He announced that when he looked out his space capsule, he had never seen God anywhere. To which someone replied, "Well, yeah, if he'd taken his suit up and steps outside that capsule, he'd have seen God in a split second." Number four, He is always available to us wherever we go, 24 hours a day. You know that phrase 24/7, 365 really originates with God. He's on task every hour of every day, all year. And He's already where we're going. My friends, wherever God is calling and whatever He's asking you to do, remember this: He is already there before you get there. And He'll be with you even before you arrive. The truth of God's omnipresence can be soothing or it can be unsettling. To some of you, it brings comfort. Maybe some of you might find it convicting. And the fact that God is everywhere present at the same time can be a disturbing doctrine. As we wrap up this message, I'm going to address these two effects of God's omnipresence: conviction and comfort. So let's start with conviction. Are you trying to run from God? Like Jonah? Is God calling you to do something right now that you want nothing to do with? Don't wait until God sends a storm in your life where you'll end up with a whale of a problem. Stop running right now. Wave the white flag. Do what He's calling you to do. Hebrews 4:13 puts it in perspective. It says, "Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of Him to whom we must give account." Are you doing something right now in secret? Maybe you think no one else will find out. Perhaps you've arranged everything so that you can get away with things. Friends, let me be honest. There's no way you can avoid the presence of God. He sees what you're doing because He's with you, no matter what you think you're getting away with. Jeremiah 23:24 says, "Who can hide in secret places so I cannot see them? Do not I fill heaven and earth, declares the Lord?" So I'm suggesting it's foolish to try to hide from God. Friends, God's not hiding behind the door hoping to scare you. In fact, His presence is meant to be a comfort to you. And just as David couldn't flee from Him, neither can we. If you sense his conviction this morning, respond to him. If you feel like a fugitive trying to flee from an ever-present God, respond to him. And the reason he convicts is so that he can get our attention. He loves us too much to keep us and to let us keep hiding and running from him. But God's presence also brings us comfort. Isaiah 41:10. So do not fear, I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And because God is always with us, we don't have to be dismayed. And this practical doctrine brings us comfort in at least 3 ways. 1, God is always near to his people. If you don't have the second half of Hebrews 13:5 memorized, you really need to do it, because it simply says, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. 2, God is especially close when we go through tough times. Maybe you've experienced recently some of the experience of Psalm 34:18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. And then number 3, God comes even closer when we get close to him. James 4:8 gives us a challenge. It says, come near to God, and he will come near to you. Brother Lawrence wrote a fascinating book many years ago called Practicing the Presence of God. For 15 years, his responsibility was to wash the greasy pots and pans in the monastery, a job that he despised. Practicing the presence of God transformed what he considered a chore into an exciting privilege. He writes, my day-to-day life consists of giving God my simple, loving attention. If I'm distracted, he calls me back in tones that are supernaturally beautiful. The most holy and necessary practice in our spiritual life is the presence of God. That means finding constant pleasure in his divine company, speaking humbly and lovingly with him through all seasons, at every moment, without ending the conversation in any way. Let me close with the story about a young man and his father. This teenager lived alone with his dad, and the two of them had a very special relationship. And even though the son was always on the bench during football games, his father was always in the stands cheering him. He never missed a game. All through high school, he never missed a practice or a game, but remained a bench warmer all 4 years. His faithful father was always in the stands with words of encouragement for him. When the young man went to college, he decided to try out for the football team as a walk-on, and everyone was sure he would never make the cut, but he did. And this persistent young athlete never missed practices during his 4 years at college, and he never got into a game. It was at the end of his senior football season, as he trotted onto the practice field shortly before the big playoff game, the coach met him with a telegram. The young man grabbed the telegram and became deathly silent. Swallowing hard, he hummed to the coach, my father died this morning. Is it all right if I miss practice? And the coach put his arm gently around his shoulder and he said, take the rest of the week off, son, and don't even plan to come to the game on Saturday. Saturday arrived and the game was not going well. In the third quarter, when the team was 10 points behind, a silent young man quietly slipped into the empty locker room and put on his football gear. As he ran to the sidelines, the coach and his players were astounded to see their faithful teammate back so soon. Coach, please let me play. I've just got to play today. Please, said the young man. And the coach pretended not to hear him. There was no way he wanted his worst player in this close playoff game. But the young man persisted, and finally, feeling sorry for the kid, the coach gave in. All right, he said, you go in. And before long, the coach and the players and everyone in the stands could not believe their eyes. This little unknown, who had never played before, was doing everything right. The opposing team could not stop him, and the score was soon tied. In the closing seconds of the game, the kid intercepted the pass and ran all the way back for the winning touchdown. And the fans broke loose, and teammates hoisted them to his shoulders. Such cheering you never heard. And finally, after the stands had emptied and the team had showered and left the locker room, the coach noticed that this young man was sitting quietly in the corner all alone. The coach came to him and said, kid, I can't believe it. You were fantastic. Tell me, what got into you? How did you do it? And he looked at the coach with tears in his eyes and he said, well, you know my dad died, but did you know my dad was blind? And the young man swallowed hard and forced a smile. He said, Dad came to all my games, but today was the first time he could see me play. And I wanted to show him I could do it. Friends, God is at all your games as well, and he's not blind. In fact, he sees everything and he knows everything, which we're going to talk about next week. And he's cheering for you today. Know that God is your biggest fan. Allow his presence to motivate you to be sold out in your service and your worship of him. Do you want to be where God is today? Are you ready to dwell daily in his presence? Only you can answer that. My hope is that you say yes. Let's pray. Father, help us to understand, like David understand, that you are everywhere we are. And Father, sometimes that's mind-boggling to think that not only are you with me as I leave this place, but you are with every single person who leaves here as well. Lord, what we want more than anything is to enjoy that presence that you give us. We want to abide in you in all ways. And so, Lord, if there's something you're calling us to do, help us to understand we can't hide or run from that. But that, Lord, you will be here for us and help us through whatever that may be. Thank you, Lord, for being with us always. In fact, your son Jesus said that you will do so to the very end of time itself. So knowing that, give us what we need to be who you want us to be for your glory and in your presence. In Jesus' name I ask.